Friends, happy Wednesday. It's 5 o'clock and I'm going to have a conversation with Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He is one of two Republicans on this House commission that is investigating January 6th. Hi everyone, Adam Kinzinger is going to be joining me for an Instagram Live to talk about the January 6th committee and what they've learned so far and what we can expect in the days to come. The next hearing, hi everybody, the next hearing is tomorrow. And so I was very delighted that Congressman Kinzinger, his name is hard for me to say, was willing to come and chat with us a little bit about the committee. And if you all have any questions about the committee and some of the things that have been discussed and revealed thus far, please feel free to write them in the question area of this Instagram. We're just waiting for him to sign on. He's going to give us about 20 minutes, so we're going to be done with this pretty quickly. And I hope everybody's doing well. Let me just tell you a little bit about him while we're waiting. Currently serving his 6th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. He represents Illinois' 16th Congressional District. Prior to being elected to Congress, hey, Congressman, how are you? I was just giving your bio. But let me finish by saying you were a member of the Air Force and you served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So thank you for your service.
You bet. Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to answer some questions from my followers, but also just talk about what the committee has done thus far. Can you tell us really quickly, just to frame this conversation, Congressman, what are the most important things that you have conveyed to the public through your work thus far?
Yeah, I think the first thing so far, and it's great to be with everybody, but the first thing so far is, I think when January 6th actually happened, we became channelized on that day. And that became, when you talk about January 6th, it became all about the violence that day, which we all know was terrible. But I think the stuff leading up to that is what I think is most important, which is, what were the steps taken that got to that point? And I think more importantly, has anything changed? By the way, I'll give you a sneak peek to that answer. The answer is no. And, what do we need to do to be aware of? So we've already gone over some of the top lines of what we'll talk about. The president, the former president was stewing in misinformation and lies, convinced a significant portion of the country that their vote was stolen. And by the way, in a democracy, the only thing you actually have to agree in is that you're going to vote and it's going to count. And then he turned to pressuring the Department of Justice. That'll be an upcoming hearing. Pressuring the vice president eventually, pressuring states. So he basically went through this process of finding a way to get his way on an election outcome. And eventually, when none of that worked out, it culminated in everybody showing up on January 6th and, not far from me, breaking into the Capitol and what we saw. That's, I think, the biggest thing so far, but we'll, of course, fill in those details.
So did this kind of activity start almost immediately after Election Day and then led up to January 6th, Congressman?
Yeah, it actually started prior. So I think a few months, frankly, before the election, President Trump kept saying things like, the only way we'll lose is if it's stolen. And the Democrats are going to steal all these votes. And, we knew about this thing called the red wave, where basically at the night as votes are counted, there's going to be more Republican votes because mail-in votes are usually counted later. And Democrats typically vote by mail more than Republicans. And so he started to prep people to say, your vote's going to be stolen, we're going to be ahead, and then they're going to do these vote dumps. So that's what led up to Election Day. On Election Day night, he started saying right away, this is stolen, stop the count. And then it just accelerated.
Ironically, he discouraged many Republicans from voting using mail-in ballots, which might have hurt him in several states because the rhetoric about their vote not counting actually suppressed the vote in several places.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly did. So if you think about it, if you're convinced that your vote may be stolen, you're going to go vote on Election Day. Well, how many people showed up with COVID that day or, had COVID and couldn't vote? Maybe there was weather. Maybe their car broke down or maybe they forgot. And yeah, it significantly harmed. There were a lot of, frankly, Republican operatives upset about that. And we had Bill Stepien last hearing and he said the same thing.
Let's talk about tomorrow's hearing because I understand from my sources it's going to focus pretty heavily on Vice President Pence. The massive pressure campaign that he was put through in the days leading up to January 6th and then on January 6th itself. Can you give us a bit of a preview? Would you feel comfortable doing that?
I can give you some top lines of what to expect, which is, so now, the president, keep in mind at this point, had tried to pressure states. He had tried to, pressure the DOJ to put a justice stamp on his lies. And then all the way up to that January 6th moment in which John Eastman, a lawyer, had basically created this memo that said the vice president has the leverage to just throw out states' votes. Now, all you got to do is look back and say, I'm very sure that our founding fathers did not intend for a vice president, particularly even before there were term limits, to be able to just say, I don't accept a slate of electors. And so, but he had evidence. And so what they tried to do was to pressure the vice president to send back some of the contested states to the state. Now, granted, probably over time, they would have come back to Congress. The problem is, in the Electoral Count Act, it specifies that those votes have to be counted on a specific day. And in reality, if that day goes by without a winner, an argument could be made, according to the Constitution, that now that there's no winner, it has to go to the House of Representatives for a vote. And President Trump would have won a vote in the House of Representatives.
In fact, that electoral, what is it called? That was from 1887, and I know that's being looked at to be amended or to be updated, and that's one of the things that the committee is looking at, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. I understand that you're going to show just how much danger Vice President Pence was in on January 6th in terms of his proximity to this mob of people. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't want to ruin the surprise, so to speak, but I think what's important to think about is there's a perception of people that, and I had it before I came to DC, that everywhere in the Capitol, there's probably some secret trap door in which you can escape and be clear, right? That didn't exist. And the vice president came very close to having no exit route. And you think about how much money we spend every year to protect the line of succession to the presidency. So at the point the Capitol was occupied, in theory, you could have had the vice president killed. They talked about hanging him. It was very clear they came after Pelosi, who was number 3 in line for the presidency. And then 4th is the dean of the Senate. All of those people, in theory, could have been killed, in which case you have no line of succession to the presidency at that point. And you can imagine any constitutional crisis from there. We're going to put that out in a very compelling way so you can see it. But it's very chilling every time I think about how close we came.
And while Donald Trump was in the White House watching this action unfold on television, Mike Pence was at the bowels of the Capitol conducting the business of government, reaching out to the Secretary of Defense, calling congressional leaders. That's a pretty stark contrast, isn't it? Especially given the fact that ostensibly President Trump commented that day, maybe our supporters have the right idea and that Mike Pence deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show in the mind of Trump how I don't even think narcissism is the right word. If there's something beyond narcissism where it's only about him. It's the only thing he can think about. And yeah, I mean, you think about the vice president, and we'll be able to show some of these images at some point, sitting in the bowels of the Capitol, refusing to leave because he was afraid they were going to whisk him out, and he wanted to stay to be able to finish this job, and making calls to leaders to get action and get things done. Vice president is not in the chain of command as vice president for the Department of Defense, for instance. But with the lack of anybody taking leadership, he was basically the person that made these calls. There will be many people that testify, many surprising people, that they never heard from the president that day on one of the darkest days in his presidency.
I perhaps should know this, but is Mike Pence going to testify, and has he been cooperating with the committee?
Well, I don't want to get too much into those details. We don't intend to have him testify as of now, but I'll say there's been plenty of, we've gotten plenty of cooperation from people around him to know what we need to know. And, if he wants to come in, we'll welcome it. But if we have to go to subpoena, you think about what What's the purpose of that? What information can we get? And by the way, just because we're doing hearings now, this investigation is not over. It will continue after June. And frankly, I think after these hearings, we'll have more people come forward.
Yeah, I want to spend the rest of our time, because I know we only have 20 minutes, asking, will this change anyone's mind, Congressman? That's the big question. I mean, is this going to solidify pre-existing views between Republicans and Democrats? Because according to one poll, and this is stunning to me, 70% of Republicans still believe that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected, despite all evidence to the contrary. So will this change hearts and minds? And you know, obviously you want the truth to come out, but will it have any impact?
So it's a good question. I think about it a lot. I think there's near term and kind of long term impacts. In the near term, I think there will be an impact kind of around the edges. So there are a lot of people that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, got channelized on the violence of that day and forgot the things that led to it. And I think their eyes are being opened. There is a lot of interest in what we're saying. And so that may make some moves around the edge. I don't expect that, tomorrow or after these hearings are done, that the whole MAGA movement's going to collapse. It may even get solidified. But this is what I think is the most important. When you look in the context of history, 5 or 10 years goes by pretty quick. 5 years ago was what, 2018, what doesn't seem that long, or 2017. What's going to matter is what we say here and what we do here will guarantee and cement what is written in history books. And I can promise you that in 5 or 10 years, my fellow Republicans that have been part of the big lie will be very ashamed of that. And my son, who is 5 months old, will be very proud of his last name because he knew I stood for truth. That's not why I'm doing it, but I am convinced that in the future, we will look back at this moment and say, I cannot believe we got that close to, frankly, destroying this democracy. So I do think it matters. I don't necessarily think, the people radicalized are gonna change overnight. But the only thing you can do with misinformation is present truth. Lastly, I want to say, this is why leadership is so important. Because people look to leaders to tell them things. And when you have leaders that don't say anything or are a part of the problem, and the folks saying otherwise are people they don't trust, they will simply go with what they believe. Leaders have to lead. If you're going to come to DC and not be willing to tell the truth, go get a different job. You can probably make more money and work less than coming out and lying to your own constituents.
Yeah, it's strange. It's such a parallel universe, and it's very unsettling, to say the least. And I wanted to ask you about the more than 100 GOP primary winners who have backed President Trump's false claim that the election was rigged. So it's not hurting them. In fact, it's helping them in cases at the polls. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a big concern. I mean, so I have a PAC Country First that we actually engaged against Madison Cawthorn, and we defeated him, and we engaged on behalf of Brad Raffensperger and put him over that threshold for a runoff. So we can make little wins like that around the edge, but what you see in these other primaries, my big concern is if you look at the people that make up Congress today, particularly Republicans, I'll tell you the vast majority of them don't believe any of the lies, but they're willing to push the lie because they can stay in power that way. And however they're able to judge.
That is so craven, isn't it?
It really is. It's something that to this day I can't understand. What I'm very worried about is the next crop of Republicans are not just people that don't believe it, but don't say anything. They're people that believe it. And my hope is that we don't have to get to a moment where the party crashes and burns, but we may.
You know what I'm very worried about, Congressman, and I don't think enough people are talking about it, is all these actions at the level of the state legislatures. They're taking actions that will empower the GOP to basically, change their slate of electors and overturn the will of the people, the popular vote. How concerned are you on what is being done about this, especially for the midterms and for 2024?
Yeah, I'm very concerned, and I think 2024 is where that threat's really going to surface, maybe a little in 22. There is maybe I think it's in Nevada or New Mexico, maybe New Mexico, a local election official that has refused to certify a win because he said he's concerned about Dominion voting machines. By the way, Dominion voting machines are rock solid, but he won't certify it. So they're having to go to the Supreme Court to force certification. That's a taste of what's coming, because what they've done is especially Steve Bannon has really started to put local elected officials in place, people who, usually don't get much attention, that are willing to violate the Constitution and not certify. And what that does is it creates a very real chance that we are in a constitutional crisis. So I agree with you. Nobody's talking about it, and it's a huge concern.
Is there enough evidence to criminally charge Donald Trump and his co-conspirators? Asked one of my followers on social media.
I'll put it this way. Since I'm not a lawyer or DOJ guy, in terms of is there enough evidence, I'll leave that to them. I do believe that Trump violated the law. I believe he violated the law in his illegal pressure. He's being investigated for that in Georgia. I believe there was a judge in this John Eastman case who created that memo that said the vice president could, throw out the electors. There was a judge in that case that said he believes that there is evidence to charge these people criminally. So I think we can present that case. We're not a criminal committee. We can give this information to DOJ. They'll have access, and that's a decision they have to make.
But Congressman, can't you make criminal referrals to the DOJ? That within your power, and where do you stand on that?
Yeah, we can. Since the investigation's ongoing, it's a decision we'll make. And so there's a lot of focus right now on kind of the internal intrigue. There really is no division. It's kind of crazy. I'm reading these stories about the committee being divided on this. We're not at all, but it's really a matter of we want to finish the investigation before we make a decision. It's fair. But yeah, I think we have evidence. We will refer that to the DOJ. It doesn't mean a ton to refer because, of course, the DOJ has access to this anyway, but it would be as much of a symbolic move as anything to say we do believe there is enough for DOJ to look at this.
I know we're almost out of time. I have 2 minutes. I promised your team that I would keep you to time, Congressman. I so appreciate you're doing this. After all of this, there's a good chance that Donald Trump will run for president, I guess, if he's not indicted. And perhaps win in 2024. What do you think the likelihood of that is, knowing that, of course, you don't have a crystal ball?
I think there's significant reality, a significant fear of it. Look, it's, the economy's bad. That typically bodes well for the president or the party in power. And I think we'll see that in 2022. And so I do think there's a great chance if Donald Trump runs that he'll win a primary. If he wins a primary, there's a very good chance he'll win the presidency. So we should be very concerned. I'm going to do everything in my power, which may not be a lot of power, but everything in my power to ensure he doesn't win.
Well, you're saying he'll win. If he wins the primary, he'll get the nomination, you're saying.
Yeah.
And who do you think he's going to be running against, Congressman?
I mean, that's a question for the Democrats. I think, frankly, if Joe Biden decides not to run again, it's probably going to be a heck of a primary within the Democrats because I'm just not sure Kamala Harris has been able to round up the support. And so it'll be interesting to watch, but that's thankfully something that I don't have to deal with, but we can watch happen.
In fact, you're going to be watching like the rest of us, but decided not to seek re-election. So what are your plans, Congressman? And would you consider a presidential run in 2024? I'm not asking you that. A lot of my followers are.
Well, look, I don't want to say no to that, and that's not a coy answer. I just, right now, that's not a plan. It's not something I'm trying to maneuver around. The reason I'm doing what I'm doing on the committee is simply because I'm passionate about truth. So if I see that I can make a difference, that I wouldn't rule that out of the table. But I'm looking forward to being out of Congress, taking a little time. I got a new kid who's 5 months old. I can spend a little more time with him. And my Country First PAC is going to be extremely involved in areas. So I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll just be happy to get out of some of these day-to-day fights in the House.
I can't imagine. I can only imagine. Anyway, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, maybe you'll talk to me again sometime. It's sort of fun to do an Instagram Live. We get 20 minutes. People can ask questions too. So I really appreciate your willingness to do this with me. It's a little unconventional, but it's a great way to get your your messages and what you want to say out to the public.
You bet. It was great. Thanks for having me. I'd love to come back. And this is only my second Instagram live I've done, so it's pretty cool.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. And
You
thank
bet.
your whole staff for us.
You bet. I will. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.